Thank you, Deborah. I think this might be one I'm going to direct to one of our bishops. Why can we not share resources in the ways that you are talking about right now? What would be the barriers to sharing resources as 3 annual conferences?
I'll respond to that because in Kansas really since 1939, the 2 conferences have had 1 bishop and at various times have had experiments. And so part of the answer is you can share resources on an area basis. What this proposal to be 1 conference does is make that sharing much more effective and easy. Let's take an example. We have an area communications department that serves both conferences. Yet, the budgeting processes, the approval processes, everything that goes on of how they support the ministry of those 2 conferences, they have to think like a 2-point charge because each conference has its own ways of doing things and it makes their efficiency lower than it could be than if it was just 1 conference. So you can share resources, but it's a lot harder. And I think the language in our presentation in the first segment of this webcast made it clear that what we're talking about doing is eliminating some of those bureaucratic and procedural hindrances by working together at the level of committees and policies as well as sharing of resources.
And Tom, I might add, that really goes back to the first compelling reason that we talked about, how do we best leverage all of our resources, and one of those resources being our Episcopal leadership. If we really desire our bishop to be that prophetic, visionary, creative leader, we will want that person to be able to do that and to have the freedom to do that and not be tied down to those 3 conference mission statements, conference structures, budgets, and offices. So this, again, frees up our Episcopal leader to do his or her job, his or her ministry.
Thank you. How will 1 annual conference reduce barriers to best ministry practices?
That was yours. That was yours.
Well, I think that's a really similar question to kind of the last question about how will we be more effective in using the resources we have, and that if we have various structures and various ways that we have to manage each process, that makes us less effective in managing a whole together. It might also be an opportunity for us to make an entirely new process and maybe to acknowledge that some of the processes are not effective or unnecessary, and to look at where is their effectiveness and to follow that and to invest in where we are efficient and where we are good models of fruitfulness, and to be strategic enough to think about what we need to let go in that process.
I'll add to that there might be 2 additional answers. One is that some of our conferences are ahead of others in certain areas. I think the Nebraska Board of Ordained Ministry has been doing work on the competencies and characteristics of clergy that both of the Kansas East and West Conference boards could learn from. As we talk about envisioning a new annual conference, I think we ought to draw the best practices from all 3 places and raise everybody up to a new and higher level. Secondly, in a larger pool of people and churches, you learn some ideas that, well, one local church develops a new idea or a program. I want to learn from that and share that idea. I was preaching in a church where some people from the Superior, Nebraska United Methodist Church were in the audience, and they talked about their desire to have a partnership with the people who are just across the state line, because Superior, as most of the Nebraskans will know, is right next to north central Kansas. And on the south side of that border, you've got towns like Republic and Weber, Belleville, and Mankato that if those were grouped together, there would be a shared ministry opportunity there. So I think the larger pool of churches and people, both lay and clergy, makes for interesting conversations to improve the quality of what we do everywhere.
Thank you. What lessons have been learned from other large conferences concerning recruitment and training of pastors? First, I'd like to address a question that this isn't.
Go for it. You're the chair.
But when I started reading it, I thought that it was going to be, what have we learned from other conferences that have gone through a process like this? And so I'll answer that. My wife tells me I'm good at making up questions I want to answer anyway. So
You're a lawyer, aren't you?
one of the real benefits that we've had as a transition team to having Gil Rendell as our consultant is that he has worked with other conferences that have formed one conference. He has worked with Indiana, for example, and in New York State, where they brought together, I believe, parts of 5 different conferences. And so we have learned from that process, both from gathering information, written materials from them as to how they processed these things, but also from having Gil there who worked with them as well. I believe one of the things that we heard from those conferences, particularly New York, only affirmed what I don't recall which one of our panelists said this, but part of what we heard in our listening sessions was, if we are going to make a change, that we make the change as quickly as possible, and that we not drag it out over a long period of time. As one person in Ogallala said, and as the Bishop Shearer Simpson is fond of hearing, don't cut the puppy's tail off 1 inch at a time. So, Bishop, one of you, would you like, since I started this question, would one of you like to just address something that would concern recruitment and training of pastors, how being one large conference might impact that or improve that?
I think it does give more opportunities for diverse kinds of appointments. One of the things I noticed in moving from a larger conference to a smaller conference was that when an opportunity emerged, there were only 1 or 2 nominations for that process, because if you took this person and put her here, then you created such a hole over here that there was nobody to put there. And that happens over and over and over again. When there is a larger pool of leadership, I think we can do a better job of matching the gifts of the clergy to the needs and vision of the local church. And I think young clergy coming in begin to see that there are a variety of places where they might serve. And if they have a particular specialization, I was talking with a young clergy person just last week who has a real desire to be in urban ministry. There are more opportunities when you put the 2 states together than in either state alone. And I think that becomes another way. Another way is we are able to focus our energy and resources in a better way, perhaps through staff and in other ways, so that we can have great contact with our seminary students, great contact with our students who are in undergraduate school, better contact and networking with our young people in camps. I'm hopeful that this strengthens us in that capacity.
And Tom, if I might invent a question like you did, because I have an answer to give to it. Concerning what we learned from other annual conferences who have gone through this very similar process, I had the opportunity to speak to the DCM both in Indiana. They created a new annual conference, and also in Upper New York, which created the new annual conference. And in both those conversations, what they learned from it is that it reinvigorated many of their clergy and laity who had somewhat fallen to the sidelines in annual conference activities and participation. And when you create something new, which is kind of the reason that we start new churches, something new in and of itself generates excitement and generates creative juices flowing, and people want to come and be a part of that and be involved with that. So it's my hope and prayer that we have clergy and laity out there who maybe have been on the sidelines for a little while who will come and join us in this new and exciting process.
Thank you, Troy. I just love making up questions and answering. There's a question that I think I've heard this at some listening sessions as well. Will appointments be made across the entire area as Kansas now does? Don't ask one of us lay people this question.
I think we,
That depends a lot on who the new bishop is, and how she or he chooses to do the process. If you become one annual conference, obviously it means that the clergy will belong to the Great Plains Annual Conference, if that's the name of it, or whatever it is that's going to be named, and available for appointment anywhere in the bounds of the conference. If you remain, though, as 3 conferences under one bishop, you still have a greater possibility of transfer between the conferences. Bishop Ken Hicks began the process of making appointments on an area-wide basis. Bishop Moody continued it, and I've now continued it. And I tend to think it's the right way to go for precisely the reasons that Bishop Sherrill Simpson just explained. You want the largest possible pool of clergy to be considered for any church where there's about to be a pastoral change. And so, well, the story I tell all over Kansas is the time that 2 associate pastors from Grace Church Olathe were appointed to serve at First Church Goodland. That's Johnson County in the east to Sherman County, which is the last one on I-70 on the Colorado border. It was a great appointment. I was there preaching last week for that church's 125th anniversary, and it's a wonderful match of clergy leadership with a particular church. But it was only because we made the appointments on an area basis that possibility emerged and was in fact what I did as the appointing bishop. Exactly how this is going to work in both states, whether we're 3 conferences or 1, will have to be something that we live into, and will depend a great deal on who the new bishop is that's assigned to this area in 2012.
I think there's another reality that we often don't name, and that is we already have a modified itinerancy. We have persons who have spouses in Omaha or Scottsbluff, and they find it very difficult to go 300 or 400 miles away and leave that spouse where they are. We have spouses who do not move, and it has been my experience that when the spouse doesn't move, the pastor who's in Scottsbluff and the spouse is in Omaha, there's not a great deal of focus in that place. So because of that, whether we want to say it exactly that way or not, we have a modified itinerancy. When the person says, I'll go all over the area, we can come much closer to helping them match their gifts to the place. But we're already making some compromises based on the realities of family situations and other complicating factors. And those aren't going to go away whether we're 1, 2, or 3 conferences.
Well, and as you and I have talked, Bishop Sherrill Simpson, we know that certain clergy have affinities for certain areas. And that a person's gifts and service are maximized when they have an affinity to the mission field. And so there are some there are some clergy who are best suited to an urban setting, Others for whom that would be a terribly stifling reality. They much would prefer to be in a small town or a county seat. There are some people in Kansas for whom trees are really an important thing, and so appointing them to Elkhart is not a good idea. On the other hand, as my wife is fond of reminding me, out in western Kansas, there are no mountains to spoil the view. And so there are people who really love those churches, those communities out in that part, and to send them to eastern Kansas would stifle them. I think the same thing will apply, and that's just the reality of God using human beings, and I assume that any wise bishop is going to continue to recognize those human factors in the appointment process as well. It might even extend to Husker football and Jayhawk basketball and Wildcats, but we better not go there.
I wouldn't go that far.
Okay. Next question, please. Rescue me, Tom, please.
Yes, thank you for not going there, Bishop. Bishop Jones kind of touched on this just a moment ago, but there's a question here: is Great Plains the proposed name of the conference? Well, that's a name that the transition team has sort of been using, but the name of the conference, if we go to one conference, would have to be decided by all three. But that's a name that we've liked, and there's a logo that's been designed for that. We're running down on time here, but would this affect and or change the role and responsibility of district superintendents?
Well,
Janet.
undoubtedly, that will be part of the conversation that continues as well, and has been already a lot of the conversation. But as you've heard with a lot of the other questions, it's a conversation in process. We're hoping that a new beginning will mean looking at creative ways to do superintendency, inviting new structures, new opportunities for supervision and leadership, and we find it exciting to look at the possibilities, but we are still looking at the possibilities and talking with other conferences about how they have done things, and will remain to be seen as we all work together in this journey of discovery.
Thank you. I've been reminded that we're running out of time, but I have an announcement for those of you who are Twitter adept. This conversation will continue on Twitter with the hashtag #, this should be on your screens now, #GPUMC. So you may continue this conversation in various ways, by phone, by email, and by Twitter. I think that we've about exhausted our time, and I'm going to ask Janet if she would close us with prayer, please.
Thank you, Tom. In the spirit of our connection as United Methodists in Nebraska and Kansas, I invite us now to a time of prayer, and in the spirit of the unity we feel around this table, I would invite you, wherever you are located, to join hands with your neighbor. I will lead us first in prayer, and then we will join in saying the Lord's Prayer together. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for this opportunity for holy conversation about your great plans for the Great Plains. May your vision surround us and fill us as we continue to listen and learn, to ask the right questions, and to make the best decisions for the missional effectiveness of our church in Nebraska and Kansas. Grant us your wisdom, grace, and love in these days of transition, hope, and new beginnings. In the name of Jesus Christ, who taught us to pray together, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Blessings to each and every one of you, and safe travels as we end this holy conversation and begin many more. Thank you for being with us today.